A bright light in a dark and bloody land. We're talking to Michael Snellen today on Spirit and Spire, starting right now.
Broadcasting from the Cathedral of the Assumption in Louisville, Kentucky, this is Spirit and Spire. And now, here is your host.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Spirit and Spire. I'll be your host today, Eric Huff, joined with my wonderful friend and co-host, Mr. John Soul.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back.
Well, we have, as always, a very special guest, but another friend of mine, Mr. Michael Snellen. Michael, welcome on.
Yes, it's good to be here. Thank you.
Now, you have to jog my memory. Have you ever been on an episode before? I know you...
As a roundtable co-host, but...
Okay.
Yes, we did an episode on World Youth Day right after we got back from Portugal, and he was on with...
I wasn't there for that one.
Who was with us on that episode?
Vincent.
Oh, yes, that was Vincent's, one of his, if not his, introductory episode. So, very good.
Okay, so Vincent was on there, and then you guys talked about World Youth Day. I know you guys probably had a lot of great stories out of the World Youth Day episode, just knowing that to a few people that I spoke to, one of the highlights of World Youth Day was Michael Snellen going around.
Oh, definitely.
And asking people funny questions and befriending birds and scaring people with rats on the subway. And those were just the temporal things he did, not to mention the apologetics that were observed that you did.
Well, also running into Jason Everett and acting like he was best friends already with him.
Seeing Bishop Robert Barron 6 times.
Right.
Yes.
It's good. I love that you weren't even there, Eric, but it was like you were.
Oh yeah, it's the stories. The myths became legends, so to speak. The other thing, just thinking of that, is I do want to bring up before, and I'll let you talk in just a moment, I promise.
Sure.
But the thing that comes to mind when I think about Michael Snellen is how great an evangelizer you are. So you have kind of two different realms, two different worlds you live in. I know you as a great evangelizer in the digital realm. But also I think of you telling me, hey, I booked these rooms at the both libraries on either side of the county so that I can have Bible studies and then just talk about patristics and the church fathers, and hopefully some people will convert to Catholicism based on that. And I'm like, man, that's a crazy awesome idea. So
Still working on that.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you go from, how did you become such a great evangelizer, somebody interested in evangelization?
So I'm a Catholic convert. I should firstly say that's really the start. So you think 3 years ago, I didn't even know anything about Catholics, had no idea about the Catholic Church. 2 years ago, I had no idea about just any type of media in general. I didn't start getting into that creative sphere until about 2 years ago. And so you think a year ago, I didn't know anything about being a school teacher. I was a school teacher up until last week when I didn't sign the contract to go back to spend my life on this media work, at least for now, the next few years. And so it's kind of all God's grace working through these different paths and meeting people like yourselves and just picking up different experiences. I think it set me up to be a digital disciple. So taking it to a serious level of discipleship for God.
So where did you grow up?
So out in the countryside, way out of the city, in Bardstown, Kentucky.
Which is
That's not too far.
It's no, not far, but it is a very Catholic area.
Yeah.
And we'll get more into that, I think, as the interview goes on.
Definitely.
But it's called the Kentucky Holy Land.
Kind of the seedbed for the archdiocese.
Yeah. Did you have any run-ins with Catholics at all growing up down there, or what was that like?
Yeah, of course, but it's like they were all undercover. So even the big churches that you pass by every day, you don't notice that they're Catholic churches necessarily. And even this monastery that was 10 minutes down the road from my house, the Abbey of Gethsemane, one of the oldest monasteries in America, perhaps the oldest, depending on who you ask.
One of the 3 basilicas in Kentucky. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Like those huge Catholic churches, you just don't pay attention to them, or you don't like notice who's Catholic and who's not. And of course, Michael Snellen, coming from a German family, all of my family was Catholic. So my grandparents are still Catholic, even if they're not practicing as well. My mom, my dad, they were both baptized in the church, married in the Catholic Church. And still, by the time I came around as a young person in 2022, or 2002, getting a little...
I was going to say,
I was like,
2 years ago, I
yeah,
wasn't
a
even
lot.
born yet.
I really was born yesterday.
Yeah.
Too far ahead, but yeah, so young people, they just don't know much about the Catholic Church. It kind of becomes cultural in a sense, and it's been that way since like the 70s. There's not many authentic or devoted Catholics, so I didn't really recognize them, and just up until 3 years ago when I was in college.
Okay. And so where did you go to college?
Western Kentucky University.
Okay.
I didn't know that. How did I not know this? That's hilarious.
Well,
John's a
it's a long story.
Maybe I
hilltopper.
actually did know that and I just forgot. That's something. Because I also went to Western Kentucky University, so it's a great gift. So you knew Father Mike Williams down there in the Catholic Campus Center?
Yes, even before I was Catholic. So the story gets even more interesting.
That's great.
So is that the next step? Is you go to college and then you have some kind of exposure at WKU?
Yes, so my college roommate, my best friend, he was Catholic, and so he went off to the military. He was actually a year older than me, but since he went off to the National Guard, we were able to be roommates. And so he, by that time, wasn't really practicing his Catholic faith that well. So he was only going to Mass, say, once a month. But whenever he did go to Mass, he would drag me along. And I used drag on purpose there because it wasn't like I was wanting to go to a Catholic church. I was starting at the time to just... It was during the pandemic, 2020 lockdown, so I was starting to like think of the bigger questions of life. Graduating high school and thinking like, what is my purpose in life? So I was asking those questions, starting to pray again, starting to read the Bible. And so it was like, it took me just reading the book of John to convince me that Christianity was it.
Yeah.
Of course, I do have some exposure to Christianity. We can talk about that later. Before that, but that college roommate, he was the one who first started taking me to Mass, and it was good as a social experience just to meet like all of those other people and join a men's group and just meet some other Catholics. And so knowing people who were Catholic, like the priest you mentioned, Father Mike, and just going to Mass and going to those men's groups, it allowed me to really get out of my comfort zone. I think that's what college did. I was talking to just all kinds of different people from all walks of life and asking those big questions and getting answers really by the end of that first year. Dropped out at the end of that first year, but I went home that summer and I was like, well, I got to find a church now. I got to start attending church on my own. And so it was the Catholic Church. That was the clear answer. So there's a little more there. I can go on to that.
So you went to college for 1 year and found conversion and is now Catholic at Western Kentucky. That's incredible.
Yes.
Huh.
And so it was more so after when I was coming back home on summer looking for a church like in my local area. And it was actually the monks at Gethsemane. They were one of the first places I saw just because I Googled, I don't know, churches or something in the area. And I saw all of these monks, all of these really devoted monks praying, living their lives as Christians. And so that was really shocking for me. I mentioned before, just kind of that exposure to a lot of people who didn't take Christianity or Catholicism seriously. And so seeing monks that were spending their entire lives devoting them to God, that was one of the things that really showed me that Catholicism was a true religion, that it could be taken seriously. So I ended up working there, not to skip too far ahead, but yes.
Making
where
fudge,
should we
right?
Pick up. Yes. Should we skip that far ahead?
Unless there's anything we're missing in between that you can think of.
Well, my baptism, that's...
Yeah. So where did you come into the church?
So actually here in Louisville, at St. Martin of Tours, going to the really traditional parish, but I kind of found this parish on an adventure. I was looking for just relics in the area. And so that cathedral you mentioned before the show, I actually went there just to kind of look around the church and just really to see all the beauty. And so that's what led me to St. Martin of Tours, the beauty and the reverence. And that's where I decided to get baptized, decided to take RCIA classes, because I thought I was going to be moving to Louisville at the time. I actually, after dropping out of Western Kentucky after a year, I went to Eastern ECTC, and I was getting a community college degree in electricity. And so that degree, it was going to lead me to a place like Louisville Gas and Electric. And so I was like, well, I might as well just take RCIA in Louisville. But it didn't happen. When I was in RCIA class, the priest there, Father Carr, he recommended this really radical path. So I was like thinking, I was working at a factory at the time, my last week of college, the last week before I was about to go out into the world. And Father Carr said, well, if you don't like this factory job that much, this factory job that I was basically only doing for the money, didn't discern it at all. Remember, I wasn't Catholic up until just that month, really, going through RCIA. And so I was asking Father Carr, like, what should I do? And so he was telling me, well, there's this monastery down the road. It was actually right beside my house, the one that was 10 minutes away. I had no idea that it was like right beside my house. But he said, well, they're all getting old, all of those monks, and they might have some job openings. You have some maintenance skills now, so you'd actually be able to help them out. So it's a crazy idea. I was like, how would these monks accept me into their monastery? But I just gave them a phone call, and they told me to come in pretty much the next week, and didn't have to bring a resume or anything. And I was accepted with these monks, working with them. So that's how that happened. Really kind of jumping around a lot here, but going back to RCIA, that was at the end of 2022. And so it did take me a while after I was researching Catholicism to actually make the commitment myself, like to make a personal commitment of going to Mass every Sunday, which growing up with a loose Christian Baptist background, going to Mass every Sunday was a big step for me. And so it did take a while, but as soon as I was baptized, that 2 weeks after my baptism, just about, that's when I entered the monastery. Not discerning at all. I kind of talk like I was discerning, but...
Oh, right. You got a job. You started your job at the monastery.
Got a job there, and so I was really raised by those monks, and that's when I started to meet a lot
because you're born in 2022.
Yeah, right.
Well, my new birth.
Yes.
That's very true.
Your rebirth, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure, born again. So
you grew up surrounded by Catholics, in a family of Catholics, but you were not baptized until then.
No.
Wow. That's miraculous that God would lead you back home in that setting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
There were quite a few like silver linings in my family. I had a grandfather. He died last year, but he was always a really devoted Catholic. I just remember him praying the rosary. I had no idea what the rosary was, all those necklaces that he had in the nursing home. He had like 6, 7 rosaries. But yeah, he was, I'm sure praying for me all of that time. And when I actually told him, like over that summer when I left college, left Western Kentucky, I told him that I was thinking of becoming Catholic. And so he was like really overjoyed, and he said, I'm glad, can't remember his exact words, but he's like, I'm glad you are coming to the Catholic Church. Your family messed up a little bit, talking about my immediate family, but yes, he gave me one of his rosaries, and I went home that next day and prayed that rosary for the first time. So by the time he died, it was like I was really the rock. He was the rock of the family, and so when he died, I had to really step up and really own the Catholic faith in my family. So he was one good influence on me, but yes, I was never baptized, and that's, I believe, partly just my parents falling away from the faith, and they ended up splitting apart when I was 5 years old. So I kind of grew up in this split household where each of my parents went off to do their separate things, and really just getting caught up in the world. And my mom would attend the Baptist church, so she would take me along with that. The Baptist church was really my exposure to Christianity, at least for the first 20 years of my life.
Yeah. I grew up Southern Baptist also, raised there. And then I also come from a split household, so that resonates with me. What was I going to ask you about?
Well, as you think about that,
Yeah.
I'm thinking in terms of your baptism while you weren't baptized as a baby, and obviously like that's an ideal setting because then you're being raised as a Catholic in your own home with your family. But in our post-Christian society, where a lot of people have either fallen away from the faith or never were raised in any faith, there is some unique grace that you receive when you weren't baptized, I think, that then built toward your actual baptism. And it's just obviously the grace of existence in general. I mean, the fact that God gave you the gift of life and then sustained you and then gave you the right people that planted the seed that would lead you to want baptism, first off, is a miracle. And so to receive that now in both the ceremony of the sacrament as well as the grace of the sacrament as an adult where you're aware and you can remember it is a beautiful gift. You know, I can't remember my baptism. And so I have been given a grace of an experience where, you know, I had some charismatic healing nuns pray a baptism of the Holy Spirit over me a few years ago at World Youth Day in Panama. But it didn't replace my baptism. It reawakened the baptismal graces in my life. But I can never claim that that was the moment I was baptized. I can't go back to that in my memory. And that's a good thing. You know, it's profound grace in my own way. But you can hold on to that and let that be your unique story and path back home. It's beautiful.
I was thinking just when John was talking about, I can't remember my baptism in the movie Anchorman 2. Steve, they're telling stories of things that they all remember together.
Oh, I remember that time.
And Steve Carell's character, I think his name's Brick, goes, "Do you guys remember when I was born and I came out and I was crying?" And
like, no.
And they're like, "No, I don't think you can remember that, Brick."
Right.
But I do remember my comment before on your baptism is St. Ambrose. When they elected him bishop, I don't think he had to receive baptism, confirmation, First Communion, Holy Orders, and the Episcopacy, which is part of Holy Orders.
He wasn't even Christian when
he wasn't even baptized when they were like Ambrose for bishop. He was like a catechumen or something.
That's insane.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's crazy.
Hey, that could be you.
That's
you never
right.
know.
Snellen for bishop.
Snellen.
So I think where we kind of left off is you had entered into the monastery, so to speak, but for work. So what did you do at the monastery? What did that end up looking like? I'm curious. I don't think a lot of people know what it looks like on the other side of the cloister wall, but you probably do to some extent. So what's that life like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll start off with a crazy story. I have to have some entertainment here. So I actually told this to a college professor before. He was asking the question, why aren't monks, these cloistered monks, why aren't they out in the cities, in the streets, helping people in that capacity? And he was giving a lecture about Thomas Merton, who, as you know, many people got on him for staying at the monastery, wanting him to be a social activist. And so what I said then, he didn't know. He just called on me like a random guy in the audience. But having that experience of actually being behind the walls, you notice a lot of things. And so one of the things you notice is that you come in with the expectation that everyone's going to be perfect, that you're going to be working with a lot of saints, already saints. The monks are all going to be holy people. And then you hear something like a small argument or a small snide comment, and it seems like it's the worst thing in the world. Or if a monk does anything
Scandalous.
the smallest bad thing, it seems like the hugest thing in the world to me, just because you had those expectations for the monk. And so it's really just showing me how grace acts in the little moments. You think like the Saint Therese little moments, it acts all the more powerful. And when it's put in that environment, an environment where there's literally armies of demons trying to take over this monastery, trying to tempt these monks, I heard that from a desert father, but this desert father said that it would only take just one demon to tempt me or you, or any of us worldly people, one demon to take us down, but an entire army to take down these monks. And so they have so much potential, and even the smallest good act they do. So something like just saying a nice comment to me, it was really much more impactful. It was like something I can remember even till now. Or one time, you might find it funny, but there was this monk. We were working alongside one another on the fudge line, putting fudge in boxes and folding the boxes and all of that. And so I knocked over, being clumsy, knocked over an entire stack of boxes on the ground. And so I like to think this monk beside me was thinking about me, literally me, more than himself. So that's the point of the monastic life, to think about others more than yourself. So I was so focused on folding the fudge boxes that I knocked him over. I was clumsy, but I imagine that he was thinking more about me. And so what he did was he picked up all those boxes. He was on the ground picking up those boxes. Even before I noticed, I knocked off the boxes. So I was so focused on my work, I didn't notice that all these boxes just fell on the ground. But he picked all those up for me. And so it's like a really small, good act, a really kind act. But it was like something I remember even till now, a year later. And so, yes, monks, just 40 monks, just a small monastery, is literally being like a power plant of grace for the rest of the world. Their prayers are affecting the rest of society.
So would you say that the monastery in Gethsemane is more powerful of a power plant than the massive battery power plant they're building down south?
Yes, for sure. Prayer has power. That's the point of the story. So
that's actually how they ran the fudge factory.
For sure. That's your real question. So what was I actually doing? I was making fudge in the hot summer in the small fudge room, really tiny room, with another monk. So I was the assistant fudge maker. I actually got a promotion.
Or were you the assistant to the fudge maker?
Well, the assistant to the fudge maker. There's just one other monk. But he was a really experienced monk. He used to run like a lot of restaurants and all of that. And so when he was at this monastery, they gave him this really prestigious position, the fudge maker. So all of us used to joke. It was like, you could imagine a TV show, a bunch of fudge makers, and there were some people just wrapping the boxes. There were people actually making the fudge. There was people shipping the fudge out. So a really joyful place, kind of a factory.
I have to say that you are describing what makes me think of the Keebler elves, the ones that make what were they, the cookies or
fudge cookies.
The fudge cookie, yeah. And that environment feels very similar, but not really. Obviously, we're not talking about the monks being that, but just no.
For sure. Yeah.
All right, so you're in the fudge room with the head elf, with the head fudge maker, the head monk.
Well, we actually used to joke that when something went wrong, we would joke, "Oh, it was the trolls."
The trolls. That's awesome.
So really fantasy environment almost.
Yeah, that's cool. So was that on the other side of the cloister wall?
Yes, inside the monastery.
Okay.
So you're with the monks, living in community on some level. Well, did you live there, or did you just work? Okay, so you would drive.
Yes, they actually do have a couple other part-time workers and other employees. They have a huge fudge operation, worldwide fudge operation, shipping out fudge.
I want to hear the minutia. Like, so you drive your car in. Like, well, how does it work? Do you drive up, you park in the lot where all the guests go?
Yeah, well, not where the guests go, but there's a gate. It's like to get back to the fudge factory
VIP section right there.
Yeah, so a locked gate, and you have to type in this code. And so it's funny, I won't actually tell you guys the code.
Thanks. That's probably not a good
Don't say that out loud.
But
right?
when they told me, when the boss monk told me the code, I was like, that's a year that relates to your order year. I'm not going to tell you how, so.
Okay, that's all we need.
I'm just going to go on their website and find every single 4-digit year and get in
Well,
there.
that's also a common sense
fetch.
kind of thing. You can do that with a lot of parishes. A lot of times the
Sure.
codes do that.
Sure. So you go in, and so do you get to see, like, I mean, I would assume you're privy to more of the monastic life, like I said, than than maybe the lay folk who can maybe travel to these places and sit in the balcony and watch, Liturgy of the Hours or something take place. But I mean, was it everything that we kind of imagine it being on the other side of the cloister wall? First off, how old are the monks? Are they all older?
Yes, I think the average would be in the 60s. So, yes, all pretty old. There are 2 new younger monks. I was working, not monks yet, but postulants. I was working with them really this year that I was there. So they're actually postulants now.
Okay.
Those are the 2 youngest, and those are outliers compared to the rest of the monks.
Okay.
That's beautiful.
Very cool. So when did you transition from working at Gethsemane? What was the next step in your journey? And we'll get to what you're currently working on via this route.
Yeah, so becoming a school teacher, that was the next step. And so you think of World Youth Day, that was in August. I became a school teacher sometime in October, the first week of October. And so didn't plan that one out at all. As I kind of started out the episode, I didn't know anything about teaching. I went to college for electrical engineering. And so you can imagine that wasn't very helpful in a classroom of middle schoolers, teaching them history and science.
Yeah.
But it did count because it was an associate's degree in science. So that's the next step. And how that came about was praying to St. John Bosco. So there's kind of a funny story there, but usually when I eat supper, or back then, I used to do this, I would just kind of invoke all the saints. Like you say, Saint, pray for us, Saint, pray for us. And one of the people I thought of was St. John Bosco. It was sort of randomly, I'm guessing I was watching like a few YouTube videos about him and all that. And he's, of course, the patron saint of teachers. And so when I invoked him, not really for any particular purpose, I got a phone call from the parish priest, I believe that day or like the very next day, asking me if I still was interested in being a teacher. Because I told him that before. That was the next career step that I was thinking of taking after the monastery. But I didn't think it would just fall out of the sky like it did. So the priest asking me if I was interested in being a teacher, and me really starting the next week, starting as a school teacher, as a middle school teacher.
Very good. Where's this again?
St. Catherine Academy.
Ah, very good.
Out in the countryside
Oh,
as well.
yeah, of course.
Which is a pretty large school, right?
About 60 students. If
yeah,
that's
it's
large.
pretty small. Yeah.
Total in the whole school? Is it K through 8?
Yes. Younger than K even. So
Pre-K through
yes,
8.
pre-K.
Pre-K through 8th.
So yeah, a little country school. That's awesome. How many middle schoolers were in your class?
There was 12.
Okay,
So-
that's
Oh, very
That's
good.
not bad. Yeah, that's
That's
pretty
a
good.
good-
12 apostles.
That's right. That's
Hey,
awesome. That's awesome.
That's right. Evangelization.
Yes.
I know we've talked about that, but I about what you're kind of working on in the sense of what was your job at that time. But I know even back, maybe even before the monastery, but definitely during the monastery and during your time at St. Catherine's, you had some. I don't want to call them side hustles, but some other projects that you were working on.
Yeah.
Can you speak to those a little bit?
Yes, so you're referring to the media work that
Yes,
I was doing,
of course.
building the IAM Catholic Creators Media Company. And
Can I
so-
first say that name is very, very mystical? Like, it's very good in that sense. I mean, there's some level of Moses at the burning bush idea, but there's also like Bishop Aaron said, when Moses heard this from God, God was basically saying to him, I am the sheer act of to be itself. Right. And so that right there is like you're unintentionally communicating with your name, like I am the sheer essence of media itself. No.
Well, the name actually does have kind of a mystical beginning. So before it was Catholicism for the Modern World. Very
Yes.
long.
Yeah, I remember that.
The classic name though. And so I was like thinking, what's another name for the video division that I was having? And I was like, the 2 patrons of the internet, Saint Isidore of Seville and Blessed Carlo Acutis, now Saint Carlo Acutis. And so those 2 people, you spell out their names, an I for Isidore, an A for Acutis, and then you put media at the end of it. So IAM Catholic Isidore Acutis Media.
Wow.
That's where it came from. So yeah, of course I was shocked when I put those together.
Isn't Saint Isidore patron saint of farmers also?
He might be. He does like a lot of catalogs and dictionaries or whatever back in the ancient world.
Okay. Because, yeah, I was thinking, what was that name of that game that was on Facebook? Like Farmville?
Oh yeah,
I thought maybe they made him the patron of the internet around that time.
That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
So
That's good.
It's kind of funny though, like this guy from the medieval ages is the patron saint of the internet. But again, it just goes back to...
Well, it's the same with St.
original
Therese being a
idea.
patron saint of missionaries, even though she lived her whole life in a convent. But she had a missionary heart, and that's what the church does. St. Lawrence, patron saint of barbecues, Labor Day.
That one's pretty messed up.
I think it's hilarious. Turn me over, I'm done on this side. Thank you, St. Lawrence. I mean, the church has a sense of humor, but it's also very appropriate to that person.
The altar at St. Lawrence here in town, like, it resembles grills.
Does it really? I've never paid attention to that. That's funny.
It's pretty cool. All right, so you were working on that, but I know you've got some other projects that kind of, this transitions from where you were teaching, I think, to now. So working on a book.
Yes.
So let's start. Do we want to start there?
Yes, and it's not done yet, so I can't talk too much about that. But it is a book that is really related, or it could only be written by someone that was raised in the Kentucky Holy Land. And so that's what the name of the book is, The Kentucky Holy Land, or it has a subtitle, The Triumph of Catholicism in Kentucky. So a very interesting name. You're like, how could Catholicism triumph in Kentucky? But you have to really go back to the history here. And so the original meaning of Kentucky is the dark and bloody ground. So a really scary name, but Kentucky was this battleground between all of the Indian tribes. They were always fighting against one another, and they could never conquer Kentucky. They could never take it over from the other tribes. And so it was only the Catholic Church that was able to do that, to triumph, to be a light in the wilderness, to create a cathedral in the wilderness.
That reminds me too. I never quote Hunter S. Thompson anymore since my conversion, but Hunter S. Thompson, who's from Louisville, Kentucky, and founded Gonzo Journalism, and that movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas it's kind of a fantasized biopic of what his life was like, a lot of drugs and craziness. But he has this quote, being from Kentucky, about a primordial evil being in this land, like some kind of ancient evil. And I never gave it much thought until you said what you just said. And now I'm like, that is kind of profound.
I have never known that
No.
in my whole life growing up in Kentucky, not knowing or even thinking about what the name Kentucky means.
Can you repeat that one more time?
So Kentucky, the dark and bloody ground.
The dark and bloody ground.
I mean, does that not speak to strongholds that have been in place even before the Diocese of Bardstown was founded?
Like Hunter S. Thompson
Before the
said,
country was
a
founded.
primordial evil here of some kind. Yeah.
Yes. And yet there's the primordial gift of life, of creation, of love that God endowed with us by nature of creating us and giving us free will that exists before that fall. But in order to at least get a glimpse of that, you have to be able to address the fall itself and some of those initial pain points that I think led us to where we are today. Because I think it even is reinforced with the Civil War, how Kentucky was such a neutral state, pulled apart in so many different ways. It's almost like that was a result of the dark and bloody ground of the Native Americans fighting over the same area. Wow.
I was also wondering too, your other project, does it tie directly into this?
So, yes, there is a film, and so it'll be a documentary film, and it basically consists of all of the footage I've taken of me traveling really over the last 5 months to pretty much every Catholic church, at least in the Holy Land, and some of the ones outside of it. But the Holy Land is just so filled with Catholic places.
Yeah.
It's funny, like even this late in the project, I'll be finishing up next week, the last filming, but just like last weekend, I was driving back after a long day of filming. I was out all the way in Perryville, the battlefield. Fort Herod as well, getting some footage there. And I was driving back, and about 20 minutes away from my home, I passed by a church in the middle of the night. And so I stopped, and I was like, I saw the sign actually. It was a Catholic church. I was like, what is this Catholic church all the way out here that I've never heard of before? Couldn't find it on a map actually, but it was called St. Francis Xavier. And so I think one of the things that made that church so hidden or so mysterious in the area is that people, or well, at least someone like me, I was always thinking that people, when they said St. Francis, they were talking about the St. Francis of Assisi parish, which is also like 5 minutes down the road. But there's this other parish like right up the hill. And so you just imagine this land with so many Catholic churches, so many monasteries, convents, and all in between. And that's what the film is going to be showing. It's going to be talking about the history, some of which we stated here, but it's not going to be going past the Civil War. So it's going to be focused on the settlers, frontier Catholicism, the Catholics moving down and really in this dangerous ground, with these Indians attacking them, or some of the priests having to travel thousands of miles just to get the sacraments to all the parishioners. So it'll be a very dramatic story, and it'll be based on the book. The book was basically just my research for the film, but the book will take like all of the interesting and relevant primary documents and put them all together in a nice condensed format. That way, someone wanting to learn this history wouldn't have to read 12 different books or visit a museum like the one we're in. They could just read the book or watch the film and learn the history. And I think it's important for us Catholics in the Archdiocese of Louisville to know the history, our history.
Yeah. So what are some hidden gems out there in the countryside that people may not know about? If they watch the film, you're bringing it to them. So I'm not necessarily saying that the people have to go out there and find it themselves. They'll be able to experience it from home, like you said. But what are some of the most amazing places that you found during this project?
Yeah, for sure. I think anywhere you go that has lots of gravestones or a huge cemetery, those are always the most interesting places, because you can just walk around and see like the names of all the different Catholic settlers, and you kind of start to see stories. And so there's one, I actually forget the name of the parish. It's St. Romuald.
Romuald?
Yes, that's the guy. But at that cemetery, there's like a child. He has like a special gravestone. It says like the first child buried in this area or something. And then like right beside of him, you see his family, his father and mother. And so like these stories of just frontier Catholicism, and really the one place I recommend anyone to go if they haven't been there already is the Holy Cross Parish. And so
Never been.
Yes, it's surrounded by gravestones.
That's one of the parishes that the Eucharistic pilgrimage is going to go to. They're actually leaving from Gethsemane on July 5th and walking to Holy Cross that same day. And so my family's going to that because we won't be able to be in the city. We'll be on vacation at that time when they're coming through from St. Gabriel, St. Raphael to St. Francis of Assisi, other places. But Gethsemane to Holy Cross is, 45-minute walk, an hour walk, something like that.
So it's very close.
Yeah.
Is it down in Marion County?
Well, it's in the town of Holy Cross.
Okay.
I believe that's right. But the locals, that has a name. The name.
Well, think
has
how
a meaning
powerful
to
it is that in the Kentucky Holy Lands, all right, Holy Lands is obviously referring to the ultimate Holy Lands of Israel, which ultimately points us to the Holy Land of Heaven. But Gethsemane is in the Kentucky Holy Lands, and that's where Christ was in the agony, right? And then right down the way, about the same walking distance probably from the Gethsemane, because I walked the Via Dolorosa in Israel in 2020. It's about that kind of distance. It wasn't super long from Gethsemane to the actual spot of the crucifixion at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So for us to have Holy Cross Church not that far from Gethsemane in our own Holy Lands speaks of, especially when the Eucharistic pilgrimage arrives, there's going to be some historic moment. And when this episode airs, it will be likely be after that moment that has happened in our archdiocese for the first time in history. I mean, you think about the physical presence of our Lord piercing through our archdiocese in a unified, cohesive way where it's the same host, the same people, the same purpose. There's some level of bringing unity to all of the parishes in the archdiocese that have the sacred host in the tabernacle, and yet a lack of awareness of that unity and solidarity that might exist, maybe on an objective level, but that subjective experience that I think the Eucharistic Congress is doing is
Father
powerful.
Richard Gooden's still out there at Holy Cross, do
Yeah.
you know? Michael
Yeah,
Snellen?
he is.
That's so good.
Yeah, got to go out there and see
He's
him.
awesome. He's awesome.
Yeah, a good friend of mine.
Praise the Lord.
All right, so Holy Cross, and then that's the oldest church, right, in our
Yes, I believe
diocese.
so. I'm not done with the project yet, so don't quote me on
Do you
that.
have a deadline, release date, anything?
Not a deadline, but I hope to have it done by the end of this month. So
Excellent.
yes, I'll have to work on it really diligently.
So Holy Cross, and then is there anything architecturally in there? Or is it just the history? What's it like?
Yeah, so I believe they tore down the old church, and I'm remembering really the primary documents here, but you can read just this huge story of how Father Nerinckx basically convinced all of the parishioners at the time, like all of these simple country folk, and they called it Holy Cross because that was something simple for them. So you imagine, like, it wasn't a really prestigious name like Our Lady of Gethsemane or anything like that. It was Holy Cross. And so he convinced all those people to basically build this new church from scratch, just with their local resources. And just around the parish, it has a grotto to Our Lady of Lourdes, a really antique grotto. It has the burial place of, I believe, the two Trappists. They came over to America, the Trappist monks, but they died on the voyage over. And so they're buried at Holy Cross. And it was basically the central place of Catholicism in Kentucky, at least from the start.
Okay. Wow, that's awesome. All right, what's at number 2? What else do I have to check out if I'm down there?
Yeah,
Or watching the video?
Number 2, there's just so many different places, and I would recommend anyone would then go to Bardstown, because there you can see the big cathedral, or you can go to just some of the other parishes, St. Thomas. You can go inside the Flagey house, the antique house, pretty much left intact. It's full of all of the artifacts, and what separates it from a place like this museum is that they put all of the artifacts in glass cases at a museum, but there it's really this lifelike house where everything just left as it was, and you can see just the place where Flagey would pray, or the seminarians would pray. It was a adoration room, very tiny room, but it had the monstrance in there, really decorated monstrance. And so I think that would be a good next day after spending some time out in the country. You can almost take just like an entire week of going around to all of the places.
Now, did Fudge ever make it to Louisville when they transferred from Bardstown? Was he ever here, or was he always out there?
Yeah, so I believe he stepped down by the time they moved. I'm not that quite far ahead in the project yet, but he was still alive at least when they built the cathedral.
Here?
Yes.
Okay. That's pretty cool. So it's pretty early days.
Yeah, and that would make sense since he's buried in crypt there. So it's likely
He's down
shortly
there.
after they finished the building, or maybe before they finished, he passed away, but it was finished enough for them to bury him here.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
Yeah. Are there any cool relics out in the country? Anything like that to see?
Yeah, I would say my favorite, it was at the St. Romuald Church. Correct me if I said that wrong, but
Gotta do that.
it's a Father Nerinckx relic. And so Father Nerinckx isn't a name that a lot of people would know, but he was really one of the apostles. He was the apostle of Kentucky. He kind of shares that name with Father Baden, but he was the apostle of Kentucky. But he also did a lot of traveling down south, starting these convents for women. And he built churches by his bare hands in Kentucky. So he was actually
That's
doing
cool.
some of the building, but really a strong priest. There's like a story of him in the middle of the night on horseback running away from like 50 wolves that were surrounding him. So this is like in the primary documents. You can find it. It'll be in the book, but a really amazing.
And it was a
place.
wilder place back then. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Louisville.
So Father Nerinckx, what's his background? That's an interesting name. Is he a Dutch guy? Is he Belgian? Something like
Yes,
that?
he is Belgian.
Okay.
And so that's another interesting facet just of Kentucky history, how much the French Revolution impacted Europe, impacting Belgium, and sending all of these seminarians to Kentucky, all of these priests, these exiled priests. And so you really wouldn't have a Kentucky Holy Land if the French Revolution didn't happen. And so you guys actually talked about it on this podcast before, how one of the King Louis's, like, what's his number? The one who was executed during the Revolution.
Last one, yeah.
Yes, he was about to consecrate France to the Sacred Heart. They never done it before, but they were about to do it. But he missed his chance. He actually tried to do it in his jail cell, but he was never given like public office authority to do it. And so
he lost the power. He didn't have the power to do it anymore.
Yeah, because at that point it was too late.
Yeah.
And so you think of like Louisville, named after him, Louisville. So they had that connection, all of these people coming to evangelize, really to dedicate this battleground to the Sacred Heart or to the Catholic Church. And so Father Nerinckx was one of the best priests. He escaped persecution just in his own town, his own parish. He started out as a small parish priest, revived his parish during the middle of all of these revolutionaries, and they were actively looking for him. He had to hide from them, go into hiding, but made his way to Kentucky, and he came in about 10 years after Father Baden, I believe. So Father Baden was the first, another French priest. And
we have a high school back in my hometown named after him, Baden High School.
Oh, cool.
yes.
Yeah, so he must have ended up at least a little further north.
Well, remember the jurisdiction of the Diocese of Bardstown was massive.
Huge.
So,
Everything west of the Alleghenies.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Father Nerinckx is a saint in my personal book, and so that's why
You heard it
his
here.
relic
You heard it
is
here
there
first, folks. He was canonized by Michael Snellen.
Yes.
All right, so is he buried here in Kentucky?
He's buried in Indiana, I believe.
Womp, womp, womp. We're
Actually,
we're
no,
at in Indiana.
I'm thinking of Father Baden, but Father Nerinckx is buried at the Sisters of Loretto Cemetery.
In
So,
Kentucky.
Yes.
Very cool.
Okay. So we've got to go out and visit Father Nerinckx too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
He founded that order, so.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Well,
I've never been out to Loretto. Well, actually, is that on the way to Bardstown?
It's a little further
That's
out of
Nazareth.
Bardstown. Yeah.
Nazareth, and then I've been to St. Catherine's too, but never Loretto.
Yes.
It's a good thing that you're sharing this, because I think a lot of the southern parishes sometimes feel underrepresented or not as involved in the archdiocesan happenings. And so to be able to share a little insight of the southern parishes to see, like, what are the places to really visit and what's the value of these parishes that are more spaced out, further away, for us to go. Because a lot of people in Louisville, I think, we're so used to being 5 minutes away from a parish or less that we take them for granted. And our retreats are usually just days of reflection. But like, there could be opportunities for going on retreat, going farther away, to then kind of find that sense of solidarity within the other parishes throughout the archdiocese. So it's great that you're here for that.
For
Yeah.
sure.
We took our students down to St. Rose Priory this year because we have that Dominican connection.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So that was fantastic. And to Michael's point, one of the coolest parts about it is all the headstones surrounding it. So churches around here, if the parish even has a cemetery, it's far from the parish. Here, like, people are buried right up to the doorstep, in a lot of these places. And one of them was funny. It was like the name of one of like the founding fathers, like their wife. So I thought it was like the actual wife of that guy, but it was like
Somebody else.
Thomas Jefferson's wife, and it had its own spot And I'm like, oh my gosh, Thomas Jefferson's wife is buried here.
What?
And so
Different Thomas Jefferson.
I Googled it and I'm like, that's not the name of the Thomas Jefferson's wife. Like, it must be another Thomas Jefferson.
Right.
But it had like this pride of place spot that it really could have been a president's wife. I don't know if it was Jefferson either, but it cracked me up. I was like, oh, not the same person. I wonder who that was.
Could you imagine if our parishioners were buried on the grounds of all our parishes today? Like, I'm thinking of my parish at St. Luke, like people who pass away, they're just, okay, find a spot on the grounds. And on some level, that would make it more sacred, you know, on some level, in our minds and hearts, a deeper sense of presence for people.
In Europe, you know, the catacombs of the church are just filled with people and parishioners. Yeah, there's probably reasons why they don't do that anymore also.
Yes.
But I think if places and how it is set up now, at least with like Calvary Cemetery, I still think when you go there, you still get that effect.
Oh, you definitely do.
You still get the history.
My grandfather's buried there. It always gives me chills when I'm there.
Yeah, and I always run into another person I may have known before they passed away or a relative of someone. I still get a lot of those experiences, even with more recent history from, I guess, the 80s till now. So, yeah, it's crazy. So, yeah, St. Rose Priory, we took them out there, and it's a bit of a haul. I always think it's so beautiful. You know the saying, like, a country mile, like it takes longer, like a country mile takes longer because it's boring or something?
Right.
I think it has the opposite effect. I can drive for hours out through the Holy Land, and I'm like, oh, yeah, Lebanon, that's right up the street from Springfield, and then just a skip over to New Haven. But really, these places are, like, really far apart.
Right.
But honestly, when I'm out there, it does not feel that way at all, and I eat up. Anytime I go down there, I eat up a whole day because I think that these places are right next to each other.
But how many people in the city proper will look at something 10 minutes away and be like, oh, that's a little too far or 15, 20 minutes away.
And
you know
city
what I'm saying?
proper, you go 20 minutes and you're across the entire town.
Right.
You've gone through hundreds of different areas. You go 20 minutes out there. Sometimes you might be driving by the same person's farm. Still,
Yes.
So it's not the same. The country mile is different, but it's so beautiful, and particularly, I mean, some of these places you'll come around a bend and it seems mountainous and the terrain's crazy, and then you'll come down and just flat, normal farmlands, and I'm like, what wasn't I just in the mountains? Like what happened? Like it's nothing. Where are those hills that I was just in?
It's almost like, Michael, that you are growing up in that space, that country mile, that wide open range, and that's like the perfect seedbed for you to have a healthy, more integrated approach to the digital world, the media environment, so that there's not so much this obsessiveness. So I want to hear about Catholic creators, right? Like I've seen you posting a little bit about that, but I didn't know exactly if that was on your radar, Eric, or not. But that was something that was relatively new, and I would love to hear you speak a little bit about that as well, especially growing up in God's creation, God's country, right?
Yes, so that's really my focus right now, at least for this summer, to really lead this community. And so it started out as a group chat, just the group chat I created for all of the Catholicism for the Modern World writers or people who were helping out with the podcast. So kind of like this really friendly and everyone knew one another group chat. But then they started to invite other people in, and suddenly you had like 100 different creators. And so you can imagine that these people have lots of skills. Some of these people are working for some of the biggest Catholic companies in the world today, and it's a global community as well. And so once I actually started to lean into this, to actually start to flesh this out, there's just so many directions you can go in. And so the first big project, there's a community platform, but the first way that I plan to really use all of these creators to actually make some change in the world is to start a crusade. So that's the word I use. I'm taking it from a missionary education group from the 1910s, the Catholic Students Mission Crusade. And so
Did they
So
give
not the
G-
original
did,
Crusades.
did they give G.K. Chesterton an award?
They might have. They were very, very big back in
I
the
think
day.
because there's a video. I think it's the only audio we have of Chesterton, and they're like, we want to make you an honorary Crusader, and he's like, Chesterton says something like, "Well, I don't consider myself to be a Crusader, but I sure don't consider myself to be a Mohammedan." Or something like that, and it's on audio, so I'm not sure if that's the same. And then I'm also thinking there was a chapel in Cincinnati that had a relic of the True Cross that was a castle that they made in the early 1900s.
That's
Probably.
it for sure. Yeah, they actually had a castle. So
My uncle lives in that neighborhood where that castle is. Yeah.
wow, you'll have to take a picture of it. I've never actually seen
Well,
this
we can
castle.
drive up and see it, man.
That's
Anytime.
cool. Yeah.
Just give me a call.
Yeah, so this organization, they took a lot of inspiration from what's the Protestant name? The Student Volunteer Missionary Movement. Does that ring any bells?
That's more words than Catholicism for the modern world.
Yes. A lot of people will know about that one.
Yeah.
But it was like 100 Protestants who decided on the spot at a college campus to become missionaries, to go out and make change in the world. And so the Catholics, the bishops, they were trying to think, what can we do as a church? And so about 20 years later, they thought, well, we'll start these groups on college campuses all across America. So they reached millions of members growing during the World Wars. They took a lot of inspiration from that, using a lot of the same advertisements and attractions. And so they were focused on just making college students, Americans, aware of what was happening in the global church. So they weren't actually training missionaries, though they did get some missionaries to come and speak at their conferences and things like that. But a very good organization led to a lot of funding and a lot of support for these missionaries. It collapsed during the 60s, early 70s, just because of the lack of missionary zeal. And so you had Catholics attacking these missionaries from behind the lines, their own lines, and the really desire to go out and evangelize pretty much evaporated during the 60s. Not entirely related to Vatican II, but a lot related to just the American politics. So you imagine like the Vietnam protesters, they were protesting against imperialism. So all missionaries were looked at as imperialists, and that led to the disintegration of this huge organization that still had millions of members making lots of money, but the leadership just decided to let it go. So I'm trying to really bring this back, but instead of having students, college students, you have creators from all across the world. So digital missionaries to go out and do creative
Sounds
work.
genius.
We got to go to the castle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Awesome. So you have you've got all these digital projects going on. You've got the movie. You've got the book. I'm just curious, is there anything we missed that you're working on?
Few things, but yes,
Anything
for another episode.
Okay, okay.
Is few projects, but those are really my focuses at the moment.
Okay.
This is good. I mean, there's a sense of unity we have because, with Spirit and Spire, like the goals that we share with many people. And I mean, you are also building a platform that reaches many people, and the goal is that we can work together and continue to build that creative environment in our beloved Archdiocese of Louisville as well, so that other dioceses throughout the country and beyond, of course, can see Louisville not as a dark and bloody ground, but a beacon of light that purifies and heals so many wounds. Right?
Definitely.
That's the hope.
A lot of potential just between all of us and our platforms, our apostolates, our just daily jobs, all of us Catholics to come together and do great things for the rest of the world, not just us Kentuckians.
Right.
That's right. That's awesome.
It's beautiful.
Well, do you have anything else you want to plug before we wrap up?
Nothing in particular, I suppose. I'll just give a shout out to all of my students. I actually didn't sign the contract to go back to my teaching job, so it really was hard the last month making this break away from teaching, but really to become dedicated to this creative work or this this missionary work. I like to have it in that line because then it makes it more valuable. I actually see the purpose of doing it. It's not just me sitting at my computer making a YouTube video. It's me reaching people across the globe. So that's really where I'm at the moment.
That reminds me of a time when I was in parish work, and a priest came in and he put me on the spot, and he's like, "What do you like about your job here?" And I was like, "Oh, I like how creative I can be." It was like the first thing that came to mind, just because he threw me under the bus, and somebody else walked up and he goes, "Hey, we're just here talking to Eric about how creative he is." And I was like, that is not what happened. So the creative aspect is very good, but it definitely has to take a second spot to the evangelization efforts.
Yeah, it's no different than
missionary
you
activity.
have children, and it's great. You can have a bunch of kids, but if you don't raise them, if you don't evangelize your children, that's not responsible.
And I
either.
don't.
Right,
They
of
run
course.
wild.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Sometimes we let them in at night.
sometimes. But that's beautiful. It's about the salvation of souls. That's the missionary zeal. I love it, Michael. You truly are an inspiration to us in that way, especially at your age. 22, right?
Yes.
It's good. Keep it up. God's got you on the right path.
Yes, and final words. More final words.
Sure.
Salvation of souls. That's what Father Nerinckx wrote in his last will, or his final will. I don't know what you call it. He didn't write many wills, but his last words, he was saying, souls, 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 nothing but souls. And then he kept going for about 2 more paragraphs, just talking about the different ways of reaching souls. He was like, he was telling his congregation, not the congregation, the sisters of Loretto, to always remain sisters of Loretto, tied to the house of Jesus, to always live Loretto lives, be Loretto nuns. And he was really incessant about just souls, doing it all for souls. So that's where we'll leave it off, souls.
Similar to the Fatima message too. All right. So where can we find some of the stuff we talked about?
So IAMCatholic.co, not .com. That one was taken, but just look up that website or CatholicCreators.net.
IAMCatholic. What?
Co.
Yes.
Okay, just co. Okay.
Without the So don't get those mistaken.
Who has the other one?
I'm not sure. I tried to buy it, and it was like a couple $1,000. So
Yeah, it's definitely an investment.
I'll
You
let loose.
work your way toward that one day.
Yeah.
All right, perfect.
Excellent.
All right, well, thank you for being here, Michael. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Patrick, behind the cameras there.
Thanks.
And thank all of you for joining us for another episode of Spirit and Spire. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We'll see you next time.